All right, our guest today needs no introduction. He's a man of many talents and many bands. Stephen Perkins. Stephen, thank you for joining the show. Much appreciated.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
How is your daily life? I'm assuming you're out west. You're in California. Could you talk about little dynamics, at home?
Absolutely. I love routine. And before COVID, I would do 3, 4 nights a week of gigging because there's so many places to play in Los Angeles. And if I did 3 or 4 gigs in a month, it wasn't enough. So I'm always finding gigs and sessions and meeting new people to play with. So stripping that out of my life was definitely just a wake-up call of how do I keep a routine? How do I keep creative and progress, frontward motion? Of course, a drummer is an athlete. So I take that side and I think, okay, I got to keep the endurance up. I got to keep the practice up. And then, of course, a drummer is kind of a yoga teacher and a painter. You have to get your body into a space to be able to create. So that's all about up here. So it's finding a new routine, and I try to work out every morning. I get out in the sunshine. I get to my drum room. I remember to, eat and drink small amounts throughout the day so I don't get hungry or full or tired or too energized. Just keep that steady flow. I love drumming, and I still have a romance holding a drumstick and hitting things. And when I was from about 8 years old to 12, I just played pillows. And I didn't know about surfaces and sound. It was just hitting a pillow and practicing my muscles and seeing how I can get faster. When I got a snare drum, all of a sudden I had a surface that bounced back and a volume that surrounded me. And then I got a drum set, and then I had to move my legs, my arms, my ankles, and cymbals and drums and all these different sounds. So there's all these new levels that kind of reignite my interest in music. So when COVID hit, I kind of backed up and went back to the pillow. Let's start in that real, one-on-one situation where you're learning how to use those sticks and play off something and learn the surfaces. And that really is a wake-up call for the rudiments in my life, how to get those early lessons brought back up here and then get more focused and find that creative inspiration. Now my kid is back in school about a week. So the days are now, I have to find a new routine because during the summer it was me and my son and my wife. We'd wake up, what do you want to do? The days obviously locked down, but you can still stay busy. We can play basketball, ride our bike. We have a jam room, and we like to read, and we do like little draw-offs. We write and draw. My wife's a photographer, and she's always seeing light and shadow, and I always hear rhythm. But, so now that summer is over and he's back in school, I'm going to have to find another rhythm, but it's still somewhat the same. Practice my drums, move my body, keep the nutrition going and the hydration, and try to strip away those negative feelings and all that darkness and news. We can't run from it. It's important. But I always think those really wonderful times in our life and those happy moments, they go by so quick. And those really dark times and those bad news days, they seep in slowly. And I'm trying to reverse that. I'll try to get those bad things to kind of like go by like a cloud and let the good things seep in and make a huge impression, because those bad things really do make an impression and they can't come out. And I'm lucky like you to play drums. I can get it out, but it's those good times I'm trying to seep in and let those seep in and then get on the drum set and have this positive energy, because I love playing, but there's nothing better than seeing people react to me playing or move. And that turns me on,
This is the whole point of a show like this and conversations like this, is to use this as a vehicle to start changing the way people think. With that in mind, because of your dynamics and work with different bands, is that what you seek, like a diversity? You need variety, working with Porno, Pyros, Jeans, a million bands of different sounds. Is that what you need to feed your soul, in a way?
Absolutely. I mean, there is this great friendship you have with your band, and that can last for years. But then again, just like an athlete, if you're a pitcher, you can't face the same batter day after day. You need to have different batters. The batter's got to have different pitchers, and this will, either bring your weaknesses to you or your strengths, and you can figure out what you need to work on or don't. And as a drummer, playing with the great Flea or Mike Watt or the bass player from Jane's Addiction, Eric Avery, they all bring something out different for me as a drummer. And I think about a flock of birds or a school of fish, and then you think about a bunch of people at a rock concert. That's how you unite them. And it's, Jerry Garcia said it when he flew over the Woodstock concert. You're not supposed to have this many people in one place unless it's a battlefield. This music can bring people together. And so there is this great feeling that as a young drummer, I wanted to play jazz. But no one in my life played jazz. I couldn't find a trumpet player, a saxophonist, not even someone on piano. We were playing rock and roll. And I love rock and roll, but as a drummer, those great jazz drummers all sounded so different from each other, and they had these conversations with the other band members. And a lot of the rock and roll based from Motown is just basically an anchor, and you don't have that much conversation. There's a few great drummers that know how to do it. Elvin from Coltrane had a huge influence on and Mitch Mitchell from Hendrix. And then you can hear the Motown pocket with the Stones and the Beatles, but you also heard the love of jazz because they love to converse with each other. And then you get the drummer from Sabbath or Cream or one of my favorites of all time, Led Zeppelin or The Who. These drummers had conversations with the other band members, the Police, Rush, Genesis, where these drummers really show off what they're thinking and not just their technique. So it is finding new people to play with, finding new instruments to explore. When I play with an upright bass player and a piano, I got to be very careful of dynamics and volume. When I play someone plugging in with a Marshall or an Ampeg, I've got to kind of get away from the dynamics and think more about the muscle and the teeth,
Yeah.
And so there is that awakening you get when you work with different people. And I always think, as one of my favorite artists, MC Escher, who has the white duck and the black duck and the patterns go right off the page. That's what a rhythm section is. You meet up, you make this puzzle, and then you repeat it, and you make little movements and little differences, but it really is a pattern that moves right out of the song and keeps going.
Well, that's the interesting thing I find, again, and I use this word, I'm going to probably use this word a lot, dynamic, that, my mentality is, as a drummer, you got to click with the bassist, you got to click with the rhythm section because that's what you are, and the guitarist, vocalists go off. But I've noticed throughout your span, your catalog, is that, you complement the guitars, you complement the singer by a beat change, whatever the rhythm is. And so have you kind of made it almost a personal thing to kind of break boundaries, break all this stigma when it comes to drums?
Absolutely. I mean, I thought Perry's poem and the way he phrased it was just as important as the bass line. I thought Dave's guitar solo, whoever's on guitar, where they headed emotionally was something I needed to follow and be part of, like that jazz conversation, and less like the Motown drummer that kind of just keeps your butt moving. I wanted to follow. And, I always thought about the Doors and John Densmore hitting something after Morrison said something, or Mooney doing it with Roger Daltrey. There was this give and take, and there was always room for it. And it made each moment an event. And I love those events in music. And, when I talk to the singer and read the poem and the lyric, there's my interpretation, but then hopefully I get a chance to ask them what they meant, what it's about, what's the heart of it, what's the intent. Let's put that into the song. Let's make that song dynamic, sensitive, emotional with the subject matter. And that way we can really get to the point and have moved people. And one of my favorite moments for Jane's Addiction is on the song Then She Did. It's on Ritual. Perry's singing about his girlfriend and his mom. They both moved on. And it was a sad song. And it was, in a sense, abstract with the idea with piano and violin and this weird jazzy solo. But it was really a story about loss. And so I felt that emotion when I was playing. And I felt like my job was to bring these huge fireworks with drum fills that were like you got to know them, you had a relationship, and then they fade away like a firework, you know? It goes up, it blows up, and then it sizzles away, but you still can remember, but
Yeah.
it's not there in the sky anymore. But it's really what I'm about, and it's true. There is a quest. You don't want to step on the song. You want to embrace it, and you don't want to do it just because you got technical skills. You want to do it where it feels right. And as a kid, you wanted to play everything, machine gun style. As you get older, you really know when it's choices. What's your choice? When are you going to make the choice to pull the trigger?
So I got to jump right into it because I grew up with vinyl and 8-track. You know, I was a little late to the game when it came to cassette players, but not late to the game to getting access to Who, The Doors, Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. And instantly, you know, to kind of go and toot my own horn. My middle name is Keith, you know, and I like to think my dad named me that because of Keith Moon. We listened to Keith Moon and played drums on our laps, pillows. To segue into Keith Moon, to segue to you, you know, Keith, reading up on him, and one thing that I loved about his early sound, and this is just rare stuff that I got to hear with, and it's got a very California kind of Beach Boys kind of drive to it because of growing up in California. Is that what you like to feel that you drew inspiration from?
There is something great about riding a big wave. It's peaceful, but it's dangerous, and it's you against the elements. And of course, Los Angeles, right next to Mexico, you have all these great smells and sounds and flavors and music, and it all mixes in. And growing up in Los Angeles, at Venice Beach, they had these drum circles. And I thought everyone knew about drum circles because I saw them every Sunday, and I saw a lot of people loosen up and get around them. And what I thought was incense was actually weed, but I smelled stuff, and I heard and smelled things, and that seeped in. And I think the feeling you get when you somehow, you know, like any sport that is life-threatening, boxing, swimming, you know, skiing, there's this massive thrill. And that's what music does. It puts you on the edge. You don't want to fail, but you want to die trying. And I think that's it feels good to go for it. And you know you're not always going to succeed. Just like any great skier is going to take a spill. Any great motorcycle, you know, racer is going to fall. I mean, it's just getting up and not being afraid to go for it again. And I think the great musicians have that courage. And the great artists, if you think about Picasso or Dali or the architect, you know, most of the Spaniards, you know, Gaudi, they're making pieces that Dali could have been a Rembrandt, just make it perfect. But instead, he put a rooster coming out of the head and you know, and a cloud that had a clock dripping out of it. But it looked real.
With a lot of your work, do you get the artists or, you know, bandmates to kind of say, you do you? Or, no, hey, I've got this concept, take this and don't change it, or just like, I mean, do you get a lot of freedom in a lot of your creative endeavors, or do you have some structures?
I think it's 100% both at all times. I am so interested in other opinions and don't feel being stepped on or driven to a different direction. I'm so interested in what the bass player hears because he might not be a drummer. How do you hear this? And you know, what's the feeling or the pulse that you want to feel? Or if the guy wants to get behind the drum kit and show me something. Oh, I never thought of that. That's interesting, you know, and maybe I could never play it like them anyways. It's still going to become mine, but it's great to be open-hearted to these musicians and artists and producers. And then, of course, sometimes they're like, what would you do? And forget the demo. Forget what I told you. What would you do? Or what would you do if you were a reggae drummer? Or if you were in Africa? Or if you were, you know, playing with Rush, what would the guy in Rush do? You know, and they give you these little, I guess, suggestions. As long as your ego is not, you know, scared of that, and you can be open, I think it's only going to help the creative process, especially as a team player. A drummer needs other musicians. Like I was saying, a tennis player, you need to play with somebody. Yeah. So it would be wonderful to be a concerto pianist and sit there alone and play Rachmaninoff, and that's the way it was written, and that's what people want to hear. but we have so much freedom, and everyone's got such a different background. And I think anybody who's coming from Miami Beach should sound different if someone else is coming from Seattle. They grew up with different music and different friends and different style of clothes.
Yeah.
And I think, if you think about environment and the rhythms that came out of Africa, you hear a djembe beat and then watch an elephant walk. It matches. You hear songs come out of New York and then look at the streets. It matches.
Yeah, the more and more I started listening into Ginger Baker, for example, he started going into Africa and started playing and collaborating on all these musicians, like Fela. Yeah,
Yep.
and it's interesting because there's a lot of things growing up that I'm like, oh, these are original sound, and then all of a sudden I kind of go and hear that, and I'm like, oh no, this came from Africa. This wasn't their sound. On your travels, has there been one or two, or maybe even 3 or 4 particular places, touring or certain things that you just walked away a different person, inspired?
Well, absolutely. The Porno for Pyros was such a different band than anything I've been in, because most bands will get into a rehearsal room with their gear on and play and write. Porno would go on surf trips, and we bring a bongo and an acoustic and have this wonderful day, and then sit around a campfire and write music about what just happened. We had Bali Eyes and Tahitian Moon and 100 Ways and Dogs Rule the Night. These are all coming out of surf trips. And there was something, like you said, life-changing about the day and what we went through and who we met and the new foods we tried. And sometimes the hell of travel to even get to this place. That goes into the experience, I mean, there's New York and New Orleans and Seattle. There's so much great music in North America. But once you get around the world and you end up in Japan or somewhere out in, Eastern Europe or Australia or Indonesia and Bali, etc., you start seeing and hearing these melodies and rhythms that are so foreign to you, so natural to them, but they make this huge imprint. And I like to gather instruments, usually drums or melodic, a xylophone or marimba type instrument, and gather musicians from those spots, learn that instrument, and take it home with me. And of course, I'll never play it traditional. I have my homegrown way, but there is that tip of the hat. This is the drum I got in Bali, and this is what the African finger drum I got in, Israel, and this is these different instruments. So it's almost a postcard of what I've been through, and then I can kind of reflect it with the instrument, and the greatest thing about playing big concerts is people 100 yards away can't get away from your drums. They can't really see you. There's no eye to eye, not like playing a club where everyone's connected, but you've got this massive sound wave. And there's people on a bungee jump or a Ferris wheel at the end of the festival, but they hear you, and they can't get away from you. And you're just the soundtrack to what they're doing, And that's kind of the experience I get when I travel. I'm just there hearing the soundtrack of the city. And if I'm in Ecuador or if I'm in Iceland, it's quite different. But I stay ultra aware, and I'm curious. And I'm just as curious to taste the local food as to hear the local music. What do you guys eat here? What is it famous for? Let's try it. What's the music that was spawned from here? What style drumming came from here? What type of drum do you guys play? It's just a friendship I have and a memory from these places. Those I hold dear, and then I bring them back home and put them in the record. And you know how when you go to mix or edit, not everything's going to make it. Even if what you're doing at the time, this is great, you got to tell the story when you're editing your film. Not everything goes in it, even though it might have been a great performance or it looked beautiful, great dialogue. So just like making a record, you go through all this stuff, but when you're mixing, you can't be upset if someone mutes it or pulls it out. It was the experience of doing it. Not everything's going to end up in the record. You don't want to cloud everything.
What was the last place that you visited that just left a imprint on you, that you came back a different person?
Well, I was very fortunate right before, I guess, BC, before COVID. I got a chance to go to Sylvia Massey's home studio, and she's one of the great producers, and she lives in Ashland, Oregon, and she turned a church into a studio. And we spent a day or two there just exploring the town where Mount Shasta is above us, melting fresh water and stream through the city or the town. And we're at this old church setting up drums and making music and just exploring the space, basically. And that was the last real, out of town experience where I got to see something I've never been there. It was refreshing to see this co-ops town where people were working together, and the market had, farm fresh and different people working together. And then we go to this unbelievable church and make music. So even it wasn't very exotic in the sense, but it really was uplifting spiritually. And there was so much freedom with Sylvia, one of the great producers, of just ready to try anything. And she reminded me that me and Perry came to her house 1986 to make silkscreen t-shirts. I don't recall meeting her, but she's like, you don't remember? You were just 17. And she was there with a drummer named Sandy, and they were hanging out. But so that experience, taking a walk next to the stream with fresh water and just enjoying a town in Oregon that I've never been at, very organic, sweet people, just wanted to make music. People were doing yoga on the yard, the lawn at the park, and selling veggie burritos on the corner, etc. So it was a down to earth experience, but it definitely was a great creative weekend, and really got some great stuff out of it.
You've known Perry for quite some time. Have you two always been creatively seen eye to eye? Have you always been on the same page? Have you guys always been that compatible to work together?
I think there's ebb and flow, and that's why Jane's Addiction and Porno for Pyros is not together all the time. There's many times we've been offered to go out and make music or make money on a concert tour, but if we're not in the same place at the same time, we don't. And I envy some bands like the Chili Peppers, Metallica, etc. 20, 30 years, losing a member, losing a friendship, losing, but still being a band and doing it. Yeah. And that's okay too. But I think Jane's and Porno and my relationship with Perry, it gets, to the point where he's 10 years older. And when we met, we had different record collections and different friends and different style of clothes. And it's still like that. But that's healthy. That's what makes a band sound different, because we all come from different places, four corners, Yeah. And so sometimes, like you were saying about electronic music, a lot of musicians don't need a live drummer. They can just put a drum beat up and write music. And then you get away from that Porno for Pyros hanging out at a campfire, or Jane's Addiction in a rehearsal room like Infectious Grooves or all the other bands that get their instruments on and play from 4 to 10 p.m. and write songs. So a lot of people can do that at home now with a drum beat. This is pre-COVID. They just have a little drum machine. So there is a sense of freedom that musicians have without a drummer, but there's also no one to bounce off and to let these rhythms kind of seep in and reactions to the lyrics or the moment. I think when I loved electronic drums as a kid, but I didn't want to replicate them. So I found new wave bands that had real drummers. The Cars, B-52s, Missing Persons, Joy Division, Bauhaus, Echo and the Bunnymen, Susie and the Banshees. They had real drummers. And even Peter Gabriel. There was like this new wave of sound, but they weren't just using a drum machine.
That's a Duran Duran. There's a couple of bands.
Exactly. They might piggyback electronics or, hybrid it, but it wasn't just press a button like Human League.
Yeah.
And there was nothing wrong with just pressing a button, but they were lacking that person on drums. So I always tried to find electronic music that had real drummers. And Perry, I know that he loves a real drummer. He also has a great appreciation for but we don't need a drummer. You just let the machine do it, And so you never want to stop the flow of creativity. If someone's into something or biting into a new type of sound, I let them chew, and chew away, and I think everyone's got that own journey. But when we
Yeah.
get on stage or in a room together, it is 3, 4, bam. It's union.
Yeah.
It's a real union, and that's what it. We're there for the same reason when we're there together. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. And talking about electronic, we had Peter on not too long ago, and we talked about his project Lance Herbstrong and his influence and wrapping his head around Cubase and whatnot and quantizing, and he keeps it pretty diverse. But talking to him, he's a pretty intense guy. I like his energy. Have you worked with Peter, like bridging the gap of like film scores, or far as like working in that kind of genre?
I mean, I've done a lot of it without Peter.
Okay.
And I've been very fortunate. This many years ago, there's a great movie by a director, Billy Wirth, called MacArthur Park. And one of the characters was a down-and-out junkie living at the park. And all he had was his trumpet. So my job was to come up with his music and his attitude that every time he showed up on screen, what would I bring? So I got myself a trumpet player and a piano player and some brushes. And we had this great, I guess you can say, a way to kind of draw a piece of art, but it's a musical piece, to this character. And I learned so much from the director and the scenes and the pacing and the dialogue and when to punch and when to not. It's very separate and opposite of writing a song. It's caressing a scene and helping it, become more emotional. And so that was one of the first experiences I had to just do whatever I wanted with this character. And then from there, many, many soundtracks, when I maybe just a percussion, they want a timpani or some interesting African drum or something called the waterphone where you use a violin on a piece of metal, violin bow. I've had all these different opportunities to come up with, I guess, soundscapes. But it's quite different than writing music for a movie. And that to me is quite exciting because you get to get into the character and into the scene and the edits and how quickly the edits are moving. And you may or may not have to use those moments in editing with the drums and the pacing of it all. And you might be in the middle of something and the scene ends. You have to know how to wrap it up, and just like you're at this climax and it's all of a sudden the scene's over. So you really need to know how to pace things with the music and the director and how much music is important, because when you pull it out, you really start to feel this emptiness. And you put the music back in and it's this nice warm understanding of the scene, even if it might be a horror scene, a love scene, or, a broken romance. All those things can be created in music. And I think the best artists can be sensitive to that. And of course, I love heavy metal music. And I grew up with, Sabbath, and then Scorpions, and Iron Maiden, and then Pantera, and then Slipknot. And all those bands could be in a movie, but maybe not from A to Z. They could be in a moment. And then you might need Tangerine Dream to show up in another scene, and Duran Duran. So even though those bands might not be available, they all would bring something to the movie that's so different from the other, but they could all work for a scene. So I really appreciate the opportunity when I'm working in a film to have all these different emotions come up. Yeah. And not like a record where sometimes, you have 10 songs and you are trying to perfect these songs as either 3-minute pieces or maybe they weave together, But a movie, it doesn't really have these little pieces. It's a story. You're telling a story and you don't want to get in the way. And I love that. Doing overdubs is a lot of fun. Like I said, just coming up with an instrument that maybe shows up and is quite an event. But the composing is the exciting part. And I love composing. I've done it a few times, but MacArthur Park was the first time.
What's life been like for you, being in this kind of state of hold?
I mean, I'm very fortunate. My drum room is now a recording studio. So not only do I get to play my drums and practice, but I can put the light on, green light, we're recording. So I have been collaborating with a lot of people, either doing sessions. If they send me their files, I can overdub to what they have, replace what they have, add to what they have, And then, there's this understanding that it might not ever get out, but you still want to do the best you can. It's not about getting a record deal or finding out if it's streaming or if people are looking at it or listening to it. It's really about giving your best performance and sharing this musical space with somebody, even though you're not in the same room. So I've done a lot of different, I guess you could say in a sense, Latin infused, because I love playing congas and timbali and not traditional Latin music, but being a chance to use those voices as a drummer has been a lot of fun, doing sessions like that. I have timpanis and gongs, so I get that more orchestral moment where I can bring that when someone needs that. I love being part of that world where I can use my, more ancient instruments and bring them to life. And then, of course, I'm working on different records where I get to play my drums as I would if I was in a studio with other musicians. And sometimes we'll do a FaceTime and they can watch or make comments, or I'll just do tracks and send it and we'll talk from there. And it's empty in the sense where you don't get that instant feedback and that excitement, like, whoa, listen to this, and you start to move with each other. But It is still very fulfilling, and it is a great satisfaction to have a job to do and not just go practice. Just like a great basketball player, when he practices, he's going for it. But at the game, it's a whole different mentality. He's reaching potential. And it's hard to reach your potential when you practice. You really need to do it, And it's like the fastest lap a race car driver is usually during the race, not during the pre-run,
I want to talk about what currently inspires you.
On the relationship side, I've seen my wife in a whole nother light. Obviously, we're together all the time, and that's new. Because usually you have time apart because you have jobs and things to do. So we're always together, and it's a wonderful just rekindling of who we are and what we stand for as parents. And so that's been inspiring to see her become this, I guess you can say we're growing. And she's growing and she's becoming more protective and more into providing in a sense. And my relationship with my son, who's 10, his summertime, not seeing any of his friends, and no trips to the mini golf or bowling or the list goes on, the trampoline park. So I've tried to get into that 10-year-old mindset where what are we going to do today to stimulate our bodies and our mind and also laugh and have fun? And that's just been a great reminder how important these times are. He really has had a tough summer, not seeing his buddies, but hopefully he'll look back and go, man, that was the time I got so close with my dad. We did everything together. He plays guitar, we jam, he's an artist, we draw. He loves philosophy and history, so we look up stuff on YouTube or Netflix and try to digest Bruce Lee's life, Jimi Hendrix's life, Einstein's life, and have discussions about these things, because to kind of see him learn it for the first time, and for me to be revisiting some of these stories and great people in our world that have done so much and left such an imprint. And I always try to remind him every flower and every tree is different. You might look at a whole forest, they might look the same, but they're all very different. And that's what people are. There's millions of us, and we come and go. And, Beethoven and Mozart and Hendrix and John Lennon, they were here. They're not now. But still such top of the pyramid creators and changing direction of the world. That is something to be so aware of and alert of, that it's possible. And who knows what was happening outside the door of the great moments in art and music. Just like right now, the silver lining will be great music and film and novels after this nightmare.
Well, that's the interesting thing is that, and again, humor me when I say this. Right now, I've been very fortunate with family and everybody around me. We've been healthy, hunkered down. Yes, it's a miserable time, but we've been able to find that reset button. It always seems like when there's tragedy going on in the world, really great music comes out of it. You know, back when Bush, really good punk music came out. I mean, that's when I discovered Henry Rollins, Black Flag, all these acts that I'm like, okay, I'm just waiting for that moment now.
Well, you think about rock and roll in the 50s, it was post WW2 in America. And you had Rock Around the Clock, Splish Splash, In the Bath, Twist and Shout. It was good times. It wasn't until Vietnam that the music in America had something to sing about that was dark. You had Hendrix singing Machine Gun. You had the Doors singing The End. You had, Jefferson Airplane, and Grateful Dead, losing their friends to Vietnam. Their friends were being shipped off and never coming back. And the music reflected that. And then you hear about the rock and roll that came out of England post WW2. They were still living in a mess. It wasn't like America where we had washing machines and Cadillacs. Their streets were rubble. And so Black Sabbath and Cream and Zeppelin and the bands had pain. And so you're right. It takes the dark sometimes to bring out some very deep artists, and for those artists to wake up those feelings. And I'm nothing wrong with rocking around the clock and splashing in the bath. That's a good time. But there was not much depth to it. And you think about what Vietnam did to music and art, and of course the women's rights and racial rights and an awakening. And everybody, and like I said earlier, Jerry Garcia saying, look at the Woodstock. All these people are here to party, not to fight. Yeah. This is a great time. So this is happening again. It's true. And there is, loss and sadness will never cease. It's always here. It becomes so one-way street. That's all you think about is the bad news. Yeah. And it is hard to see the light after all these. And watching the news, you also get opinions, and you hear people's opinions. It's not only just news; you're hearing what people think about the news, opposed to just the facts. Because we don't know the facts. It's just it's hard to figure out the facts from the opinion. So these things can disrupt our creative flow and our chi. And I am looking for, like you said earlier, the rhythm of a baseball player or a comedian or a drummer or someone who sets the traffic lights in Bali. There's a rhythm to figure out how to make things move. And we've been disrupted, it's true. But there is, it's like crossing the street. You need to look both ways. There's cars, you can get killed. There's COVID. You can get killed. You have to do the right thing. Wash yourself and wear the mask, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Social distance. It's just like looking both ways in the street. You don't just run out there. There's fucking cars. You can get killed. So I think this is a reminder of how things now are avoidable, but also we can't just be blind to them.
Yeah.
So it is. It's the new food for the artist. It's the new fodder to keep us creating. And like that Vietnam moment, music's going to change, lyrics are going to change, attitudes are going to change. And I would love to see 20,000 people at a concert together. Well, but
I think everybody just needs just a good year to kind of pump the brakes and figure out by this time next year how we're going to all do this, because we'll all come together. That's humanity's not dead, it's not over. But with that in mind, life imitating art, or vice versa, art imitating life. I've studied and listened to your Jane's Addiction, Porno for Pyros sound for years, and other bands. With Jane's, what was kind of the mindset to go about and create something? How did it all come together? With
Ted just admitted, inspired by Bad Brains.
Okay.
Bad Brains with this hybrid of Jamaican dub with punk rock and lyrics that had meaning. We weren't trying to sound like them, but wow, listen how they can dub out and take you on this sonic trip and then hit you in the face with this tight technical punk rock band. And of course, lyrically, Perry was so, and he still is, on the money. If you think about Stop, that's about the world's moving too fast. There's too much technology. We can't stop. No one's leaving. About racial issues in his own family. Ted, the images on TV, and now, I'm 52. I'll be 53. There used to be something called Faces of Death. It was a VCR tape, VHS tape.
Yep.
And but now that's all over. Everything's on the internet. You can see things that you would never imagine. So these images are shocking, but they aren't anymore. Really, they're nothing shocking. So there was this great poem that Perry had about Ted Bundy and all the images and becoming callous to it, but still so interested. It's almost like pornography. You want to know, but you can't. You don't want to look, but you have to. And this great understanding of telling a story with this sonic, like I say, like how Bad Brains would take Adrian Belew, guitar player, they would take these sonic moments and just be cinematic, quite cinematic with their music. And so I remember trying to, and Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus, how they would use that dub and that reggae Jamaican influence to really set a cinematic visual. So we always tipped our hat to those guys, thinking really interesting to not just play the song, but to feel out the lyrics and take our time. And it's no rush. It's just, this gathering. It's unite people in this, and then hit them in the face, And that was always the coolest thing. If you had good players, you can think of something, and if you practiced enough, you could do it, and that was the force of Jane's Addiction. At the end of '85, the Sunset Strip was coming to a quick, bitter end. The punk rock scene with X, Minutemen, even Chili Peppers, Fear, Flag, Fishbone,
Yeah.
They were doing something, but Jane's took it all and put it together. And, we were a very after-hours band. So the Strip in LA would end at 1 a.m. Downtown would start around 1 a.m. So it wouldn't be rare to see guys from the Strip like Motley or Faster Pussycat or Rat hanging out downtown with the Chili Peppers and X and Fishbone. And who's on stage? Jane's Addiction. Yeah. We were the band for these people to mingle with. And a lot of great future filmmakers and writers and musicians were there, and it was a great union. We all were cheering each other on. It was competitive. We actually shared a rehearsal room with Guns N' Roses, Fishbone, Bullet Boys, and Jane's Addiction.
Interesting.
All four of us were in the same room, and we just put our gear in the corner until rehearsal and pull it out. And all four of those bands are so different from each other.
Yeah.
But we were all just, hey, it was, the LA music scene had different camps, but we all really did cheer each other on. We wanted success. It wasn't about money, but it was about spreading the word of you do it yourself. You don't have to have a regular job.
Yeah.
And you don't need a record deal to do it.
The moment I heard the first album play on cassette, I stopped everything. And then fast forward a couple years later, right before college, I saw the band play in Delaware, a very random place, and was blown away and was kind of like, oh my God, this is the sound. This is the LA sound that's going to take over everything.
Was the Delaware concert, was it Einstein A Go-Go's? Was that the name of the place?
That might be the venue.
Because I'm pretty good at remembering venues, because I think Delaware we only played twice.
So I now have to go dig, because I have the ticket still. It was just a very just sporadic, no, you didn't know that you were in town. You didn't know certain bands were even playing. It just, we walked in, we're like, okay. James has been influential in my life, in and out, for many, many years. And even to backtrack, I worked at MTV, and I worked with Perry's sister there. So I met the band back at the Hammerstein Ballroom back when Flea was filling in for, on bass.
Well, real quick, the Halloween show at Hammerstein with MTV, by far one of the craziest, coolest, unleashed nights of all time. And Flea, for me, to say, hey, I want to be your bass player if you guys are going to play. It was such it's a friend, but it's one of the greats.
Yeah.
And he really, really, really wanted to make it right and make it his. And he didn't want to repeat anything that the original did, except the songs were played correctly, but his heart is so different. It's a different guy. And he took his heart and he put it into it. And those nights at Hammerstein, wow.
To kind of segue into other things, what has been, as far as music that you've contributed to, what is the songs or certain things that you just really get behind that you're very, very proud of?
Well, there's so many great sessions I've done with, Rage, No Doubt, Nine Inch Nails, Love and Rockets, the great Rob Wasserman, who's passed on, Bob Weir from the Dead. I mean, these things are so deep to me, and it's really not even the music we made, it's what we did together. We got to make music together and give each other this trust. And that to me was the gift, really the gift of playing with other musicians. And I played with Lou Reed and Ozzy and just it's these great Billy Idol and it's John Doe from X. These are just great musicians with great souls and stories. And that's a great experience for anybody, just to meet somebody, but to play music with them and then be the responsible guy as the drummer and keep the rhythm and the feel for them, especially if you're playing maybe one of their songs they've been playing for years, and all of a sudden you kick in. Are you going to bring something special? Are you going to replicate what they know? Are you going to give them something they'll never forget? And those are all great things that change my thought process on how life was going to turn out. I just worked on a tune with Shankar, the violinist, who played with Miles Davis and Peter Gabriel. And we just did a song, and he had Jonathan Davis sing it from Korn, and I'm on drums. He played violin, and it just came out a couple weeks ago. I'll send it to you. And that, to me, is one of the highlights of my career. It's not about the song or the people, it's the union of doing it through all this mess. And now that's out, you feel like you made something out of nothing, because it's been so hard to really make great art for everybody. Everyone's at home practicing and everyone's doing streaming and stuff, but the greatest thing ever is to be with people in a room and write music. And I think that's when the great stuff comes out. So this song that we just finished, I'm so proud of, because I can remember that we did it right before COVID. And it was the last time I was in the studio with a bunch of guys. And now that it's out, I can reflect on that and listen to it and remember the experience. So that to me is, I guess, the freshest thing, is the most impressive thing. It's made a big impression on me.
What impact have you made at this point on the industry as far as a performance artist?
Well, I think if you think about Jane's Addiction's influence, we were the soil or the fertilizer that those great bands grew out of, like the Pumpkins and Tool and Rage and Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam. You don't hear us in them, but I think when you pick their flower, they had to grow out of soil. And we are that soil. We are the fertile soil. We were able to wash out that Sunset Strip cookie cutter type of band and say, you know what, you can be freaks. And we found a great label with Warner Brothers, because they said, we don't want to change you. We don't want to produce you. We want you to be you, and we're going to show the world this is what late night Los Angeles looks and sounds like. Take it or leave it. And that was, I think, a great marriage with us and Warner Brothers, for them to understand they're not going to try to produce us and dress us and put a style on us and edit or censor the covers or the lyrics.
So it really was that kind of loose where you can have that freedom? It was with that label?
It was a great marriage for that, because there was other labels that offered us actually more money, but they wanted more control. Warner Brothers said, we're not going to give you a big bundle, but we're going to give you freedom. We'll give you artistic freedom. What we have is now yours. Our studios, our art department, our publicity will introduce you to the right agent, the right manager. It's your choice. When you go to England, you'll see a poster on every corner. When you go to Copenhagen, when you go to New York, we're going to tell the world, you just do your stuff. Be freaks in the studio and be freaks on stage. And let's show the world, what else LA has besides what we've been feeding the world with.
Do you think having that freedom was because of your live performance, or because of having a producer behind you that gave you, their blessings? What was actually that catalyst?
It was great to have our first live record, Triple X, done without a label. And had Whores, Pigs and Zen, Jane Says, I Would For You, 1%. Here, this is what we do, this is what we sound like, this is what we talk about. This is our first record, and we're going to progress because we're going to become a better band and better songwriters, and you can hear that from record to record, but we're not going to change for any one reason except what happens to us. And there was no schedule. You need a record every 12 months. There was no real story to, I guess, promote, except what are these freaks going to do? Now, what I was going to say a minute ago is Warner Brothers had another label under their umbrella called Sire. Sire had the Pretenders, REM, the Replacements. They actually probably would have been a better fit as an art department and a radio department because they understood that music in a sense that we were doing. But we didn't want to be on Sire. We wanted to be on Warner's and test them and challenge them. Because Sire would have done what they did for REM and the Pretenders, and it would have been the same route. Warner's had this band they didn't know what to do with. But that was good for them, because they had the Doobie Brothers and Van Morrison and Van Halen, they had the bands, and, they had some great music, Paul Simon, etc., but they didn't have a Jane's Addiction. And when they had a band like that, like REM or the Replacements, they ended up on Sire, which was a great team, but it was a team that was thinking small, maybe. Yeah. REM finally did not stay there, but they ended up on Warner's and they moved on. But yeah, I think Warner Brothers with Mo Austin and Lenny Warnaker and Steve Baker, they were running the show. Yeah. And Roberta Peterson, she's passed on. She was our A&R. They were just reading the lyrics and feeling the beat and saying, this needs to be out there, just like this. Just do it the best you can, And as we got to Ritual, we became more of this, maybe it's the wrong word, but progressive band, like a Yes or a Genesis or Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Then She Did in 3 days was so different than anything that came out of Nothing Shocking. Ted was hinting on it.
Yeah.
This progressive band that would go most anywhere, because Had It At or Mountain Song didn't really show that, So there was this band that was evolving, and they were just excited to see where we were going.
With Ritual, was there an emphasis for radio play, or we're just going to make an album and it doesn't matter, the length of whatever song, we're just going to put it out there? What was the mindset going into that album?
It was just make a record, because you think about Stop, there's no chorus. There's 2 verses, a guitar solo, and then a vocal a cappella. Sing along with the TV, there's no verse. If you think about No One's Leaving, song number 2, it's verse, chorus, and then this whole second half of the song that's got nothing to do with the first half. Yeah. And, Ain't No Right. I mean, there's really no chorus there. It's just, verse and then a pre-chorus, verse. And so we really weren't writing songs for radio. Now, with Caught Stealing, the tune was written a while before that. And with the MTV video, there was this great tongue-in-cheek sense of humor about the lyrics and the band. And the song itself has got jazz chords. It's not a rock tune. Those are jazz chords, and it's very swinging. Yes. So we didn't really have this single idea, and we didn't really think much about how the songs were written formula-wise. How many times you guys do the chorus? Where's the bridge? We never even thought that way. It was a poem. Yeah. Perry, what are you singing? Oh, you only sing this once, and then you say something 5 times in a row? Okay, let's write a song around that, Sex is violent. Okay, you say it 20 times. Let's increase the heat. and then smash open something, you know? So it really was about the poem and dedicating our time in the studio, because we were a great live band, recording this live energy and then using the technology of the studio, which was always so fun for us, to add salt and pepper and cayenne and jalapeno, you know, and kind of decorate the music. But it's really about capturing the live band and the energy, and that was created by many, many shows together. And the songs were written around these poems. And so we really never thought we should change that formula, if you call it a formula.
There are very few, but yes, sometimes I'll wake up and I'll be in a project and certain things, and I get the nervous energy. You know, I'll think about things 3 days prior. You know, stay up night before. Do you still get that? Do you still get that nervous energy?
Well, I never lose that. It's I felt it when that first discovery of how it feels to hit a pillow, and then 2 years later how to hit a snare drum, and 2 years later to get a drum set. 2 years later, I joined the marching band, had a competitive spirit with 10 other drummers. 2 years later, I joined Jane's Addiction. And there's all these little markers that change my perspective on what the music means and what to do with it. But there is this great urge, like a baseball player when he's up at bat. You know,
Yeah.
a home run would be great. Get on base would be great. Just, you know, try your best. But you do have a team waiting for you, and you do have the fans supporting you, and they want you to do good, and they want you to show us something. And so that drives me. I love knowing that the band and the audience and the customer, they all get what they pay for, you know?
Yeah.
And playing, you know, just like this conversation, we're one-on-one, nothing's distracting us. That's what happens in a small venue. If someone walked in the room right now and I give them a high five, I get distracted and I lose us. And that happens at the big venue, because you got all these bands on the side of the stage watching you and this massive field of people. But it doesn't make the conversation less. It just maybe just changes it. So those big shows, there's distractions, but there's also more to pull from. And,
of course,
you know, more moments that steer you. And then the small shows like this, but you still get that feeling inside, like you're up at bat, it's you against the world, and do your best, and you know, and hopefully you leave everything you can do on stage so you can get into bed that night and have no regrets.
What is something that's caught your eye recently that you find very intriguing?
I'm very fortunate. My 10-year-old's playing guitar. So when he first started, I said, okay, this is Jimi Hendrix, this is the Beatles, this is Zeppelin, but now he's searching out his own thing. And I heard him practicing a flamenco piece. I was like, what are you listening to? He's like, listen to this. And the guy was tapping on the guitar, do 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 ding 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 do. And he was after it. He wanted to learn how to do that. And so all of a sudden I thought, wow, this is a great lesson for me, that I can only show him what I was inspired by, and it's only going to go so far. To keep him hot for the music and hot for the instrument and to practice, he's going to have to find his own, his magnet. What turns him on? I
was impacted, you know, early on with drums, going to actually a West Point game. I was at a West Point game and I heard the marching band. What was the influence for you, you know, at an early age to get involved in drums? At 8 years old, I was very lucky to see this movie about Benny Goodman. And they had the real Gene Krupa playing himself, and they had an actor named Steve Allen playing Benny Goodman. And every time they went to Gene, he was smiling, he was tribal, he was for me, he was the show. But it also felt so good, and I felt like moving. And this one scene, he's doing a solo, I think it's possibly Sing, 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 the big famous one. And they go to the audience, and there's a conservative couple, and the husband's tapping his finger, and she looks at him, she says, can't do that. And then the camera goes to her feet, she's tapping her foot. And I was like, there you go. You cannot stop it. You cannot stop the drums from reaching people. And my drumsticks were just such a great friend to me, not only to hit the pillow
or put on a Beatles record or a Jackson 5 record and try to imitate these sounds just by rhythm. But it was a way to see the progress in my life and to mark time. I'm getting better at something, and faster and stronger. And it felt like a sport. It felt like you were playing a sport, but you were alone. You can do it at any time you wanted. And so I started to find this great freedom of me be able to go alone with my drumstick and play on the pillows. And as I got lessons, it was more about how you hold the stick and how to bounce it off the drum head. And then I realized, okay, there's technique and there's rules, and those are all meant to be broken, but you got to learn them first. And then so all of a sudden I had a responsibility to myself. It was more than school, and it was more than chores. It was a responsibility to myself. If I want to get better and I want to learn this, it's a promise, and it's willpower, and it's fun because I'm a drummer. But then again, it can't always be fun. You need to work at it. And I think that early age of just finding how I get better at something by putting the time into it, and seeing that it was my choice and I wasn't told what to do or what instrument to play. I really had this power. And of course, as I got better and played the drum set and seeing people react to it, and I can play a Van Halen beat or a Beatles beat and seeing people get excited, that gave me more reason to keep learning. Even things that I wasn't interested in. If someone said, do you know how to play this song by this band? No, but I'll go learn it because I want to satisfy you, and now I've got a challenge. And those challenges are hard to find. You got to keep challenging yourself as you get older. And I love jazz and rock, but that all of a sudden I needed to buy Latin records and Indian records and African records and check out Fela Kuti and Babatunde Alatunji and Zakir Hussain. Listen to drummers that aren't on a drum set, but are making rhythms that are so important to where I could somehow make this world beat sound and take from different places and bring it into a homegrown version. And then the marching band was so good for me because I thought I was a good drummer, and then there was 10 guys doing the same thing. So maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And so there's that competitive side where I wanted to be first chair. And it was more than just practicing. It was learning these new pieces of music that I wasn't familiar with. And those challenges are so good for me to have something to work for. And I love getting a list of songs for a session or a show. And maybe I know a handful of them, or I heard of them, or maybe I didn't. But they're so important to get into the song. Even before I play it, just put it on and let it run through the household over and over. So the song is just part of me and it feels me. So when I do play it, I'm not just, doing it by the numbers. I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
And so those things are still so important to me. And I find that's what I had at 8 and 10 and 12 and 15, these little tiers of raising the level of the meaning of the drum and what it takes to get it done.
To segue into the jazz, I am a late bloomer when it came to jazz. I didn't appreciate jazz until my mid to late 20s and then the early 30s. And kind of wanting to know more, I started kind of working in doing documentaries, music, live showcases with my camera work and producing and directing. I got to work with a really good jazz legend, this gentleman, Larry Rosen, who passed away. But long story short, working on a documentary, working on something for Sarah Vaughan, I got to meet Quincy Jones. And Quincy came in when I was working and shocked me. He said something really that resonates to me to this day, is that, creativity is like a faucet. It's always on. Once it goes off, that's when the clog happens. But for now, keep that creativity flowing. Has that always been the case for you? Have you always had that creative outlet?
I like to think I am more a creative drummer than a technical drummer. And that does have the hook in me. I've been hooked to be creative at all costs. And very fortunate, and also some terribly unfortunate things have happened to me. And like I was saying earlier, you don't want the dark side to be the deeper impression. You want those lighter things, those happier things to make that deep impression. But I've got a balance of both.
Yeah.
And very interested in using both those experiences to funnel it into a sharp, razor sharp, creative slice. And, yeah, you want to replicate your heroes when you're young and you realize you can't.
Yeah.
But it helps you get better. But then you have these experiences, a record deal, and then the loss of my brother, uh, this, this great meeting my wife, and then the band breaks up. Different things that could be just life changing, and they are. Some are bright, some are dark, but use those and mix them together in some kind of a blender, and then create out of it, because that's where I think where I get the demons, if so to speak, or I exercise the bad feelings. I can get them out by being creative. And there's nothing worse than doing the same thing over and over. I can't imagine any painter would want to paint the same painting over and over. Yeah. Or, one drummer knows his favorite beat and people love it, but you do want to learn something else. Even if they don't like it as much, you need to grow. So creating and also sending people home to make love, not war, after a show, 3, 4, bam, go home and have babies. That's I think what music can turn, our music can turn people on.
Well, Stephen, has worked for me in my household. I have 3 kids, so thank you. Has there ever been a project that you're just like, I would love to redo?
Well, I think, as I get as a better musician, you can always listen to your past work and wonder why you did that, or if I can only do it again. But then the courage is on paper. The courage is on the recording. That's what I'm after. So sometimes I wish there was either a better performance out of me, or maybe I wasn't wandering and I was more in touch with the moment. You get the track and then they love it, and then you're like, I wasn't feeling it the whole time, but it sounds good. Yeah, but the track earlier, I was attached to it. Yeah, but it might not have been what they wanted, or maybe sped up or slowed down, whatever it might have been. So I have to learn how to detach from my favorite moments and take one for the team. What's best for the song or the actual production. And I'm very open to the producer's ideas, but sometimes they're a 180 from mine.
Yeah.
And then I'll listen back and I'm like, that doesn't sound exactly like me or what I would have done, but that is me. That's me playing under the supervision of this producer who's producing this band. They hired me to play, and so that all goes into the equation. Playing for a great coach on a great team, you got to do your best, but you also have to pass the ball, and I think that's part of it. And so and then of course sometimes you're in a situation where you don't love the music, and then you think this is the bad choice. I'm not here for the money. I'm here for the music, and then that's a regret. But I don't have many of those. But that's something where I like, this is not something I would listen or play to my friends over and over. Either it's got no heart, or it doesn't have a sensitive side. Even though Pantera and Slipknot, they can get sensitive. It's fine if it's hard rock music, but as long as they're sensitive, Korn is very sensitive. Mm-hmm. That people can be sensitive to their emotions and still play heavy music. So that's it. If they're not really feeling it with their emotions, I don't want to be there.
I've finally come to terms now. I'm 44, and I've come to terms that money is not everything. It's the people that you're surrounded with. It's the projects that really pull the heartstrings and the passion out of you. And that's the one thing that I've been trying to get back to and trying to kind of relate to people is that, it's not about money. It's about people. It's about the experiences and enjoying the moment. Because if you just take whatever you're doing as a job and a task, it's going to go nowhere. It's going to sour you eventually. And that's where I've been trying to kind of seek out Inspirato and draw certain things. So I definitely can relate to you. My question is, and I kind of like to have a little bit of the curtain drawn back and get a little bit of the insight. Some of my questions I've asked to people, like, hey, do you have a car collection, motorcycle collection? I don't envision you as being that materialistic where you've got like a 65 Jag laying around. Is there any way we could kind of pry into seeing that little home drum studio? Because I think that's what I would like to actually see. I would love to get a little bit of behind the scenes of Stephen Perkins' home layout. Not too in depth.
Well, this is where I spend most of my time. drums and more drums and the gong collection. Just come back here and, make sure this is why if I have the time and I don't use it, it's a sin. I've been blessed not to have a real job. I've been blessed to be surrounded by drums. So why shouldn't I play every day and get the best out of these? It feels good to hit these things.
There's two things that I can do in my life that once I'm done, I feel reborn again, almost like I've been baptized. It's surfing and drums. Once you get into a session and you come out a different person. And most 9 times out of 10 for me, I'm happy. I'm ecstatic. I want to do more, and that's the thing is I feel like there's this energy, this force that comes by, and it takes a certain type of person to pick up the sticks. Thank you for making the time to give a little bit behind the scenes, a little bit of insight into your life and sharing your time with me. The last conversation, the last topic I got to talk about is, what kind of legacy do you feel that you're leaving on the music community? What kind of legacy do you feel that you're creating?
I want to leave, music is a wave. So when you play, I don't think it stops. It's still going somewhere. And like those light years, they say that star's already burned out, but the light just got here. Music just keeps going. And I think what I want to be remembered as a positive force on earth with music. If that's my gift, to make people forget about their problems and just enjoy this experience that I enjoyed at Venice Beach when I was a kid and seeing these drum circles. I really want to make that impression on the world because I think those vibrations help the grass grow. They help the birds chirp. They help the kids jump up and down with good vibrations. I really believe in that. And so my job is to spread happiness with music. And now that I'm a husband and a father, I can get more internal and a smaller circle and use that energy. But there's nothing compared to playing these massive festivals and seeing people jump up and down. You don't know these people. And you might not ever get to know them personally, but you make this impression on them and you loosen them up and you give them a chance to socialize and meet people and dance. And I think it's a gift I'll never forget, that if I don't feel like playing drums, I don't feel like hitting something, erase that idea, get in there, and a few minutes later you realize this is what I'm here for. Thanks for asking.
No, thank you for again your time on here, and I know you kind of gave a little bit of a tidbit. What exactly are we to expect, as far as sounds from you? Is there anything that's coming out? I mentioned personally, I am just chomping at the bit for some new music, some really good, intense stuff. Obviously, something that could fuel from everything that's going on in our current environment. What should we be expect?
Good news is that Jane's Addiction played the Lollapalooza virtual show a month ago, and we hadn't seen each other in a couple years on stage. And after we played, we all know and think it's time to write music that reflects what's happening. And like I was saying about Hendrix with Machine Gun and the Doors writing The End, Vietnam went into their music. And so I'm looking forward to new Jane's Addiction, influenced by this last 6, 8, 10 months, whatever it's going to be, taking that influence and putting it into something, like you said, that's got meaning. And punch and bite is a word that maybe sounds violent, but I think punch and bite also at the same time is a release. And I want people to feel a release with our new music. And so that's what I'm thinking. It's time for new Janes. And I still got to talk to the boys, but what the hell?
And to kind of rip from lyrics, there's always pleasure and pain and vice versa. And that's where I think with music, there needs to be another education session, because that's where I feel, you mentioned Band of Gypsies. That's how I got my education of certain bands that have educated me. Public Enemy. If I didn't listen to Public Enemy, I wouldn't be the man I am today. There's such need for that information and education. That's why I'm like, if James is gonna bring it, if you're gonna bring it, I think the world is welcoming it. So I, as well as many others, look forward to hearing your sound and continuing playing music. Stephen, thank you again for your time. I know it's precious. That's a wrap.